So, Mr. Atkinson, the floor is yours.
Hello, councillors, mayor. My name is Myke Atkinson, and I live in Banff Trail. And I would like to take a moment to speak to the engagement process for the Guidebook. While there are those who disagree with what is being proposed in the Guidebook or who don't think that it goes far enough, it is disingenuous to condemn the engagement process just because you disagree with the result. No matter the outcome of this vote, the engagement that was undertaken during the creation and refinement of the Guidebook needs to be celebrated and encouraged. Over the past decade, I have noticed continual increased effort in regards to citizen engagement from the city, and the Guidebook process in particular has showcased how those doing the engagement at the city are innovating to capture more perspectives and diverse points of view from Calgarians. I personally participated with a couple of the avenues provided, and I was especially impressed with the installation gathering perspectives every single day for months last year at the Central Library. And I also loved hearing yesterday about the efforts to break down language barriers in yesterday's session. Anyway, I just want to say thank you to the crew over there that are spending your evenings consulting with the public, and I want to make sure that we don't equate opposition to the content of the Guidebook with a lack of engagement in the process. And on that note, as much as you should definitely take into account the voices speaking to council over the last 2 days, mine on all that you've heard, I would ask that you weigh them accordingly alongside the voices of the thousands of Calgarians like myself who participated in dozens of engagements the city led in development of the Guidebook. In the past, I have heard council grapple with questions about which voices are missing from these presentations to council, and robust engagement like that conducted for the Guidebook is one way to build this more equitable result. If we are going to continue working to build a city that works for all people, we need to encourage everyone to get involved and bring their thoughts to the table. Here's the key part, early in the process. We need to move away from building policy on the floor of council chambers, and council can help to steward this shift by properly weighing and emphasizing all the perspectives captured in the Guidebook's engagement sessions when making your decision. And just before I get off the line, I heard that there might be a motion that has something to do with restrictive covenants. I'm not entirely sure the content of that motion, but as I mentioned earlier, I live in Banff Trail, a neighborhood that has a row of single-family houses directly beside a C-train station. Obviously, if we're ever going to achieve the goals of the MDP, we cannot have single-family homes directly beside C-train stations. It just doesn't work. But there's a restrictive covenant on all the properties in Banff Trail that is preventing these properties from redeveloping into houses for many more Calgarians to have access to affordable transit right outside their door. So anyway, just be careful with whatever that restrictive covenant motion is all about. I don't know the content of it, but I just wanted to make it known that restrictive covenants are also in places that need development, need to change, need to grow. I'm sure that many of those that have spoken in opposition even to the Guidebook would agree that lots that are directly in front of a C-train station are exactly the kinds of places that higher density should occur in our city. That's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mr. Atkinson. And you know what? With all the conversation about whether the engagement was good or the engagement was bad, I just want to highlight the fact that, yeah, these are real people with real families who are, I'm talking about the public servants here, who've taken their evenings and their weekends to try and get into the community during a pandemic. And I think it's important not to forget that. And as much as we value the time of citizens coming in to do that, you know, I really appreciate that you took the moment to recognize the public servants doing that work as well. Peter Dormaar, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
You sound great. You've got 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Peter Dormaar, and I'm an MBA candidate at the University of Calgary. I'm here as a private resident. I've read the Guidebook, and I would like to lend my support for it. I'd like to talk about how it will help the municipal budget by densifying and attracting businesses and is an essential part of Calgary's story. I'll start with the budget. Calgary is experiencing a budget crisis. On the revenue side, we have a lower downtown office value with vacancies of 30%. In their most optimistic scenario, Avison Young forecasts vacancies of 28.6% by 2024. Office vacancy may never reach its 2005 low as we see a flood of capital spending from foreign oil companies from Alberta, and companies discover that distance working is possible and far cheaper. The static nature of municipal budgets has meant that the tax burden is shifting onto homeowners and small businesses, making living here less affordable. On the expenditure side, other cities that have built as low density as us are experiencing infrastructure replacement costs that are twice as much as their tax bases. This has resulted in scenarios where homeowners' tax rates in some communities would have to increase by $4,000 just to sustain their share of already built infrastructure, ignoring any new infrastructure. It's essential that Calgary lowers our IRC per resident, and the only way to do that is to densify and make more efficient use of the infrastructure we've already built. I believe that filling our downtown towers and building more densely will be the defining challenge over the next decade. The Municipal Development Plan and its guidebook will help us solve it. What attracts companies to a city? If it's the corporate tax environment, then Wyoming, South Dakota, and Montana would be renowned centers of business, but they aren't. Those titles belong to states with some of the highest corporate taxes, New York and California. Companies settle there because they have agglomeration economies, but they're also fun, vibrant places to live. It's the same reason why Austin is experiencing a larger economic boom right now than Houston. They both have the same corporate tax rate, but Austin is denser, more sustainable, walkable, and vibrant. The Amazon Institute, too, is another example that shows that companies are willing to cave and pay higher corporate taxes if it means working in central, vibrant cities. The Great Community Guidebook is a tool for us to become what companies are looking for. It will allow us to compete with other North American cities in attracting international streams of capital and talent. But it means much more to Calgary than that. In 1988, the city pulled together to host the Winter Olympics. 22,000 Calgarians signed up to volunteer. There was an electricity in the air that we'd never felt, a feeling that we'd grown up into a big city and had a bright future ahead of us. The new C train connected us, allowed people of all ages and classes to get around. The new Saddle Dome gave us a unified identity. Nothing like it happened again until 2005, when the city came together for Imagine Calgary. 24,000 Calgarians took part, a number larger than the volunteers for the Olympics and 160 times larger than that of those speaking today, expressing their hopes and dreams for the city they wanted for themselves and their kids in the year 2050. A familiar electricity was in the air, and a similar hope for the future, this time with a belief that only if we kept on working and nurturing this common vision for decades, we could make a more healthy, equitable, walkable, and vibrant Calgary, open to the world, to become what we knew we could be back in 1988. Imagine Calgary became the basis for the Municipal Development Plan, and the Guidebook for Great Communities will allow us to put that plan into action. These are just the first 3 steps in a decades-long process of democratic, community-driven change that we know we need to take for the sake of every future generation of Calgarians. That's all for me. Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks very much. That was super interesting, and I was just walking down that road with you, thinking about being involved when I was young. I was young once in all of those things that you mentioned. Let's go to Ms. Davis, please. Are you there, Kathryn?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you've got the floor. Go ahead.
Hi, Mayor and Council members. My name is Kathryn Davies. I will keep my remarks short, given the late hour, but I would just like to speak up and state my support for the Guidebook and hope that Council will pass the best version of this document. I have listened to nearly the entirety of this meeting. There have been many excellent comments made on both sides, some spurious arguments notwithstanding. One common driver in this conversation is status quo bias. Many citizens have expressed that they are happy with their neighborhoods the way they are and do not want to see changes in built form or zoning. I'm sympathetic to this position. Change is scary. However, I would suggest that there are serious costs associated with maintaining the status quo. Calgary's current growth patterns are simply not sustainable environmentally or fiscally. These issues have been addressed by previous speakers, so I will not rehash the details. I am particularly impressed, though, by Nathan Horlock's comments earlier this evening and his meticulous research on Calgary's looming fiscal reckoning. Throughout this discussion, I keep thinking about a comment that was made a few years ago during the debate on secondary suites. Quote, maybe we should stop calling them secondary suites and start calling them places for people to live, end quote. There has been a lot of talk about density as some vague, menacing force that is going to seep into our established communities and pollute the air. But really, we're talking about housing for people, places for people to live, one of the most basic human needs. We need to consider the far-reaching benefits of creating viable, equitable housing options throughout the city. The economic, environmental, and social challenges facing Calgary are many, and I believe the Guidebook is a crucial step in starting to address them. Thank you. I cede my time.
Thank you very much for that very thoughtful, even though short, conversation. Let us go to Darris Perzan. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
The floor is yours. Please go.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. My name is Darris Perzan. I am a new resident in Ward 8. I have recently lived in Ward 11 and own property in Wards 2 and 4, and I've lived in Calgary for nearly 20 years. I'm not sure why I'm supposed to tell you that, but that seems to be the trend of the past 2 days, when all that really matters is that I'm a Calgarian today, no matter my history or how old the house I live in is. I would ask Council to support the Guidebook for Great Communities. Much of the narrative shared over the past 2 days has failed to recognize that diversity is a strength of great communities and cities. Diversity of thought, socioeconomic backgrounds, cultures, ages, and places. Diversity is what makes communities vibrant and thriving. Most of what I've heard over the past 2 days are arguments against diversity and against change. These arguments are thinly veiled under the guise of saving quote-unquote community character. What these veiled arguments really meant to say is, I don't want anyone that is different than me living next door, or my community is not welcoming of diversity and is only open to a certain type of people. The communities that have been represented on the majority in this public hearing are not representative of Calgary and should not be the voices that win the day. They are not the character of this great city, and there should be no place in City Council for a platform of blatant classism and bigotry. Yesterday, a councillor talked about council having more power over citizens in these public hearings. The majority of people that you've heard from have more power than your average Calgarian, and it is only making that power dynamic worse by lifting those voices up. By placating these voices, you're pushing the smaller voices down, telling them they are not welcome in all of our communities, and ignoring the voices that don't have the means to sit and wait to speak to council. This process is broken. It's inherently exclusionary to those that do not possess the means to wait for their 5 minutes to speak. It also undermines all of the public participation and feedback collected through the more inclusive engagement process. The argument that there has not been sufficient consultation just because one does not agree with the outcome does not validate the argument. In addition, sadly, many do not read the engagement reports, and the ideas contained within are long forgotten. Instead, what we are left with are these voices that are not representative of Calgarians. The people that should be represented are Calgarians from all backgrounds, not just wealthy taxpayers. Paying higher taxes does not equate to more power or a voice that carries more weight. The majority of the speakers that I've listened to come from communities where the average individual income is over $300,000, and where visible minorities make up only 12% of the communities. These are not your average Calgarians. To be honest, all this public hearing has done for me has made me embarrassed and quite frankly ashamed to be a Calgarian. I worry about the future of this city if this is the narrative that we allow to win the day, a narrative that flies in the face of market economics. It's something that boggles my mind. I would challenge the idea that allowing any type of increased density into areas devalues the properties in those areas, or that it somehow negatively impacts one's abilities to enjoy their own property. This narrative seems to be based more on fear rather than fact. At the end of the day, I want to live in a city that is welcoming, inclusive, and sustainable, and a vote for the Guidebook is a step forward to ensuring a healthy and vibrant city that we can all be proud of for many years to come. So I urge you, Council, I urge you to please end this embarrassment, this blatant classism, and support the Guidebook for Great Communities. It is your job to ensure that Calgarians never have to feel that they are not good enough to live in a certain community because they come from a different background. So I implore you to do the right thing. My other hope, in closing, is for you councillors, after listening to this public hearing and allowing this process to play out, that it gives you pause to look at what is wrong with the system that you have created. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perzan. I have a lot of reactions to what you said, but perhaps I'll try to distill them into a question at the end of the panel. Mr. Wing, please.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
And it sounds like someone's unmuted, so I'll echo the reminder to please mute.
Thank you for doing that for me. Go ahead, Mr. Wing.
So, yeah, I live in...
Wait, Mr. Wing, it didn't work. I have to do it.
Sure.
If you're not Mr. Wing, please look at your phone and make sure you're muted. And Mr. Wing, you're a little bit muddy, so just stay very close to your phone as you're speaking. Go ahead.
Okay. Is this okay?
You sound great.
Great. So I live in West Hillhurst, which has been a hotspot for redevelopment in the past few years and has numerous densification developments underway as we speak. Before I get into my prepared remarks, I would like to second the idea of inclusionary zoning, which was brought up earlier today, whereby in return for increased density, developers are required to allocate a certain percentage to be affordable housing. I think that's a fantastic idea and worth incorporating into the guidebook in whatever form it's ultimately approved. With respect to the guidebook, the way that administration has positioned it is that it will inform the local area plan, which will then prescribe how a community builds out. In principle, that sounds good. If the LAP is ultimately the document which dictates how a community grows, then why didn't the city just proceed to that step of creating LAPs with each community or groups of communities, such as those in the North Hill Plan or the upcoming Riley Communities Plan, which I've thrown my name in to be part of the working group? That would have ensured that community feedback directly impacted the outcome of the LAP. By having this in-between document, which lays out what can be included in an LAP, the city has already predetermined the outcome of the LAPs to some extent, and this is what citizens are worried about. The city has been trying to alleviate fears by saying that community members will be able to guide the development process by providing feedback during the LAP creation. The worry is that the guidebook in its current form will have effectively already written the local area plan by stipulating the criteria for development and specifically higher density. So while the guidebook is intended to provide more clarity, it is actually missing key specifics which would at least provide certainty for community members as well as developers and allow everyone to clearly state what they agree with or don't agree with. As an example, on page 48, it says that higher intensity should go near or adjacent to main streets, transit station areas, and other activity centers, but does not go on to define the terms. How far is considered near or adjacent? What is a transit station area? Is that a bus stop or something larger like a BRT or C-train station? Activity center is also undefined, which leaves the door open for uncertainty. Is that a community center? Private recreation facilities? Keep in mind that these Zone A communities are much, much smaller geographically than communities further out. So being specific about what is near or adjacent is important. If 500 or 600 meters is considered near, well then the whole community of Hillhurst would meet that criteria by its proximity to Kensington Road and 14th Street. Similarly, in Inglewood, 500 meters from 9th Ave basically captures the entire community. So rather than vague terms like near or adjacent, I would feel much more comfortable if there was a defined distance. Then at least I could say, okay, that's reasonable, or maybe that should be 200 or 300 meters. Same goes for the vague undefined terms of transit station areas and activity centers. The worry is that when it comes time to develop the LAP, if administration then comes to the table with those activity centers already defined and is able to point to the guidebook and say that, oh, well, that part of the community is considered near to that activity center, Well, then the bones of the LAP have already been set, and any engagement with the community at that point will have limited or no bearing. Similarly, where the guidebook says that moderate or lowest intensity is supported where the parcel, quote, is of a prohibitive parcel shape or size, it would be beneficial to define this. Put in a specific lot size threshold, along with some minimum dimensions for length and width. In West Hillhurst, we have seen row houses, which are considered higher intensity in the guidebook, approved on laneless lots that were about 25% smaller than a standard lot. So what exactly would be considered prohibitive? This would provide clarity not only for residents, but also for developers as they evaluate lots for potential acquisition and development. For the guidebook to have teeth, it needs to be specific. Yes, it may not explicitly change the zoning of a community within the guidebook, but because it will be setting the parameters of how a local area plan is drafted, it has the same potential to dictate the course of the entire community if it's not clear. The need for a clear guidebook, and in turn a clear LAP, is huge. In West Hillhurst specifically, there isn't one in place, and we're seeing that a significant chunk, almost a third of the east side of 19th Street, across from Dairy Lane, is currently in various stages of redevelopment without a local area plan in place. These are currently all small 1940s era bungalows on laneless small lots. There are proposals in the works ranging from new houses with front garages to commercial developments almost next to each other in this area. So to use a pizza analogy, which administration used yesterday, if a plan isn't put in place soon enough on 19th Street, well then by the time the menu has been finalized, the city will discover that all of the dough has already been baked. Communities want to be confident that the LAP will incorporate and be sensitive to their feedback. I ask that Council reflect about the lack of specifics in the current guidebook and think critically about how it can be improved to take away the uncertainty faced by community members and developers alike. Lastly, I would request
Mr. Wing, you are at time,
any...
so I'll just ask you to wrap up, please.
Okay, sure, one sentence. I would request that any proposed amendments, such as allowing for single-family special policies in the LAP, that they be spelled out clearly with the specific criteria that would need to be met. Otherwise, there will still be worries that a special policy may exist in name in the guidebook, but will not be allowed in practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wing. This has been a very, very interesting panel, one that I will remember as we go forward. And I never do this, and I chastise my colleagues when they do it in public hearings. But Mr. Perzan, I want to bring you back for a moment, and I just want to say thank you. This has been, well, a year, but particularly a few days for me, where I have much had on my mind how different people experience the city. Whether it is young women who tell me that the level of catcalls and street harassment is unbelievably high now, whether it is women, particularly women who are targeted because of their faith, as we saw on the weekend, or whether it is people who now feel emboldened to march through the streets with racist paraphernalia. So I've been thinking a lot about the issues of power and of class and how those issues impact the work that we do. And something had been bothering me through this entire conversation because I keep hearing about the power differential, that council has all the power here. And I couldn't articulate it. And I'm so happy you did, in terms of reminding us of our responsibility to the 1.3 million people who have entrusted us with the responsibility of holding, even for a moment, their hopes and their dreams for their community, and their fears too. And I think that's something that we have to remember. And, I remember when I was in your side of this, when I was a university professor with great privilege, and I was reminded of the many, many day public hearing that came before we adopted the municipal development plan in 2009. There were two people at that hearing who had the floor for more than an hour. I think council was much more patient in those days than we are now. I remember still Councillor Collier-Card asking me the question, well, your 5 minutes is up, what else do you have to say? Which is the worst question you could ever ask me. But we ended up having a big conversation. And even then I thought to myself, wow, I happen to be a professor who's on summer break, so I can sit here for 4 days. And I did. And who are we not hearing from? Who are we not hearing from who's working shifts? I just got a note from someone who said, I'm embarrassed to live in a certain inner city community now. I just wanted to live here so I could walk to work. And we're not hearing from her because she's a doctor and she's on shift. So forget about just people who we think of as people of a different socioeconomic class and whether they're in the room or not. It's everybody. And just all I want to do is say thank you for reminding us of that. And I get mad at council when they speechify during public hearings, but I will say thank you and invite you to give us any reaction.
Well, that's what leadership sounds like, Your Worship.
I guess my response to that is, having heard so many of the people come forward and talk about all of the issues, and we talk about that power shift and maybe the imbalance of power, and as silly as it may sound, to quote, from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. There is a tremendous amount of responsibility that comes to those of us that do have that, and to speak for those who may not have that voice and stand up for them when they can't. And that's how I'll end.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I heard someone say that's what leadership looks like. But you know what? That's leadership every single one of us has to exhibit in our lives, in every interaction, every single day. Councillor Farrell?
Thank you. Mr. Perzan, would you please email all members of council your speech if you have written it down, or was it off the cuff? If it was off the cuff, it was incredibly moving. If you wrote it down, I would like to have it.
Mr. Perzan, I think we've lost you, but if you heard that request, please do so. Thank you. All right, that takes us... Yes?
This is Niall DeBreo. I instinctively hung up after my submission. I think it was the last one. I'm hoping there was a question that I missed. You know
what, Mr. DeBreo? I got a text saying, can I ask Mr. DeBreo a question? And I said, I think he's gone. But given that you're here, I'm very happy to accept that question. Was it Councillor Farrell who had that question?
I believe Councillor Corral was sending a question.
I'm not sure he's with us. He's trying to manage a police commission meeting here as well, which is very critical. But I do have the question, which is, can you talk a little bit about consultation and land acknowledgement and how we might have done a better job on that?
Absolutely. And this was even, I think, attached to the letter of the Anti-Racism Action Committee to Council, acknowledging that I think that would be a very critical point to start this document with, is the land acknowledgement, because the more I hear it, the more I think about it, is the more impactful it is. And I can say I've heard a few people, some with anger and some, like when I say people, fellow Calgarians, some with anger and some with even tears in their eyes, talking about the importance of maintaining history before progress. I think it's important that Council never forgets what the acknowledgement of Treaty 7 land actually means, and the sacrifices that were made from the original caregivers of this land, providers of this land, and try to keep that in mind when we start to honor, I guess you'd call it a supplementary inheritance of these lands. If we're talking about reconciliation and we're talking about building greater communities or even just healthy communities, to supplement the voice of concerned, segmented individual Calgarians over the history that is the basis, the violent history, the vile history that's the basis of our entire country's existence. I think it just demonstrates the complete inability to know what it means to actually take claim of acknowledging systemic racism last July. To not challenge the police and defunding, that's fine. But at what point are those statements actually meaningful? And this doesn't mean to break down and call everybody a racist. I challenge council, and I truly believe that we saw what consultation looked like when the ring road, the final portion of the ring road was open. A young Indigenous man, courageous, whose community actually had accepted the consultations and the decisions of council. He didn't. He cut his hair in protest. There is an ability to move on from decisions that are not actually what deep down everybody wants. That's not what that is about. It's about what's best for all Calgarians. Some would argue the road is what's best, even with consultation. Like, I really encourage council to not be blind to the fact that consultation, especially when heard from select members of our society, is so acute that, like, there's not even an acknowledgement of the assistance that all Calgarians, or a big portion, gave to said communities following the floods, versus the support that council and insurance companies have not provided to following the hailstorms. We have to wake up. And it's not a us versus them. It's Calgarians all deserve protection and reasonable decisions. But I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. DeBreo. Since I've gotten into the habit of speechifying, I will speechify a little bit more. And I will say that we've heard from a lot of people in flood-damaged communities in the last little while. And it just reminds me of the importance of community action to look after one another. You know, I was in Northeast Calgary just after the flood, and I ran into someone, and I actually wasn't in Northeast Calgary, I was in Elbow Park, as a matter of fact. And I ran into someone who was volunteering and helping out. And I said, "Were you impacted by the flood?" And she gave me the dirtiest look. And she said, "Mayor, how could you ask me that?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "I live in Northeast Calgary. I'm your neighbor. We're high and dry. My basement's dry. But we were all impacted by the flood because we all live here, because we're all Calgarians, and we look after one another. And certainly we are making a giant investment to protect communities along the river from flooding. And those are the people in Forest Lawn paying those taxes. Those are the people everywhere in the city paying those taxes. And I think after these last couple of days, I am really thinking hard about how we continue to build community here together. So sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional, but that is where my head is at. Now I actually have a real job to do. And my real job to do is to tell council that it is 9:27 p.m., which means that we are finishing off. I've still got about 20 people left on the list, which 20 people equals about 2 hours. So I am proposing, unless a member of council wants to try a different proposal, that we now recess for the evening and reconvene tomorrow at 1 p.m. I'm not hearing anyone jump in.
I'd move that we hear one more panel. I'd like to finish this evening, Ms. Boswell. It's Joe.
So I've got two different people. Councillor Davison, what did you say?
Yeah, I'd be okay going one more panel and then reevaluating where we're at.
Why don't you set a time for me? So do you want to go until 10 or 10:30?
Sure, let's go till 10:30 and see what we can get through. I think there's still lots of people on the line, so if we can capture them tonight, that would be great.
Yeah, I also want to be respectful of those people. Not everyone is a night owl like me and is at their best talking to council in this environment at 10 or 10:30 at night. But I'm certainly happy to test council's will on that. Do we have a seconder to go until 10:30?
I'll second your worship. I have a question too.
Councillor Gondek, thank you. And let me go to you, Councillor Gondek. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question would be, is clerks aware of anyone that has any kind of a limitation on only being able to be here today?
Good question. Do you know, Madam Clerk, Mr. Clerk?
Just quickly checking. We have one speaker who claims she can't be back tomorrow.
Okay, well, we can put her up to the front. Just send me the name.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that if this passes.
And that's it?
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've got a motion before us to go until 10:30. On that, are we agreed? Are there any opposed?
Sean Chu.
I'll hear this one speaker, but I don't want to hear the whole panel.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. Oh, I think
Farkas also opposed. I agree with Councillor Farrell.
Okay, can we call the roll, please?
Councillor Demong.
Yes.
Councillor Farkas.
No.
Councillor Farrell.
No.
Councillor Gondek.
Yes.
Councillor Keating.
No.
Councillor Maglioka.
Yes.
Councillor Sutherland.
Yes.
Councillor Woolley.
No.
Councillor Kara. Councillor Shahal. Councillor Chu.
No.
Councillor Collier-Kurt.
Yes.
Councillor Davison.
Yes.
Mayor Nenshi.
Well, would you look at that? How often does that happen? However, I believe, Madam Clerk, tell me if I'm wrong, that that's actually changed to the procedure bylaw vote and it requires a 2/3 majority. Is that correct?
It's just a regular majority vote.
Okay. In that case, I will say, I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm obviously getting late myself. I will say yes.
That is carried 7-5.
Thank you. All right. And if you could send me the name of that person, I'll put them in the next panel. All right. So I've got Philip Turnbull. Are you here?
Yes, I am. Thanks.
All right. You're first in the next panel, Mr. Turnbull. Justin Simaluk, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we'll put you second. David Barrett?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we'll put you third. Thea Wingert?
Yep, here.
Put you fourth. And Nathaniel Schmidt?
I am here.
Oh, you're all here. And have you got that name for me, Madam Clerk?
It's Judy Luck. If she's
Judy Look. Are you here, Judy? Oh, we might have lost her already. I'll try her again for the next panel. But let's get started with this one. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I apologize if my cat is crying in the background. First, I just want to say thank you to both council and city admin for the opportunity to speak and for your patience going through 29 sets of panels so far and continuing late into the night. I have to say it really is quite an incredible thing that any Calgarian can have an opportunity to voice their opinion to council. Although I do note the previous conversation about inclusivity. I've lived in Calgary for all of my adult life. I've lived in a variety of communities. Most recently, I rented in Mount Pleasant for 4 years, moved away, and then moved back to Mount Pleasant when I bought a house. We've heard a lot of opponents argue that the city didn't consult on the guidebook, and that is plainly not true, as the city has been engaging on this issue for years. I attended an information session on the guidebook and the North Hill Plan. In my view, city admin did a fantastic job engaging the public. This isn't something that's just been pushed through overnight. Frankly, and as previous speakers noted, just because you don't like something doesn't mean that consultation or engagement didn't happen. I've been listening to most of this hearing throughout the day, and we've heard a lot of opposition from a vocal minority, mainly in a certain community that live in single-family houses, and I think it's safe to assume that this group represents a certain socioeconomic class as well. I'm here to say that I'm part of that class. I live in a single-family home, and I'm all for the Guidebook. I would suggest to council that the amount of time that you've lived in the city, the community you live in, your socioeconomic status, whether you own your home or rent it, or the type of housing that you live in, should not have an impact on the weight of your voice. Cities are not exclusive, and a single community within the city should not have a disproportionate voice. I think several recent speakers have noted, including Mr. DeBreo, highlighted this very well in previous panels, how decisions that affect the city should have inclusivity in mind. Last I checked, the sign at the city limits says that we are all the city of Calgary, not the city of Elbow Park. So as a resident of Calgary, I ask council to please vote yes to the Guidebook and not delay needlessly. A vote yes is a vote to limit Calgary's unending sprawl, to reduce servicing and tax costs, to improve affordability and diversity of housing, and to reduce the city's environmental footprint. Personally, I'm very excited and look forward to the vibrancy and density and the diversity that our communities need, and ultimately this will make our city more interesting. Going back to my home in Mount Pleasant, I can't wait to see how Centre Street and 4th Street develop, as well as Balmoral Circus, as a result of this Guidebook, and the Green Line that's hopefully someday going to be built in the future. Again, I just ask that you approve the Guidebook, and I hope to see the city doing more work in the future on inclusive and affordable housing throughout the city. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening, Mr. Turnbull. Let's go to Justin Simaluk. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, Your Worship and members of Council. My name is Justin Simaluk, and I would like to thank you for providing the opportunity to speak during this important discussion and share my support for the Guidebook for Great Communities. I've been a resident of Calgary in many forms, including a student, a renter, a property owner, and I've experienced many styles of housing. However, these comments do not matter, as other presenters tonight have pointed out. While I can say wholeheartedly that I love this city and I'm proud to call Calgary my home, this is not a reason to disregard planning and policy mistakes we may have made in the past or are about to make in the future. It's no secret that Calgary is a sprawled city and that this kind of development has serious financial and social costs. We are larger in area than Toronto and Montreal, while also having more kilometers of roadway than both of those cities combined. We have inner-city communities under their historic populations as we continue to push our borders into the countryside, swallowing up land and creating communities that are not inclusive, thriving, or equitable for all of our residents. A few goals from our municipal development plan specifically state that we are to create a compact city, great communities, have great urban design, and manage growth and change. We are failing these goals. There is copious amounts of data and expert opinion on how diverse communities with choice in housing are critical to building a city that will continue to thrive long after we're all gone. The Guidebook is a step in the right direction to achieve the goals of the Municipal Development Plan. Complete communities are key to bringing financial stability to our city in a changing global economy, and quite frankly, if Calgary doesn't adopt to a changing world, we will be left behind. There appears to be a disturbing amount of weaponized misinformation coming from certain members of council and the public with regards to zoning and density. In terms of high density, the term high density has been passed around worse than our ability to control COVID-19. If people think townhouses are high density, then what is the Beltline? Super high density, mega high density, super mega high density? There's not going to be some secret density police terrorizing your neighborhood, knocking down heritage homes in the middle of the night and replacing them with row houses. Contrary to what many presenters have said and displayed, you do not need to be fearful of change. We've already heard arguments specifically citing race, class, and elite opinions regarding home ownership, as well as tired tropes of congestion, parking, lot coverage, density, and infrastructure capabilities. These are all cleverly designed tricks to block development and progression when convincing arguments have failed. If Calgary is committed to being an open and inclusive city, these kinds of fears and divisions must be overcome, not influenced and encouraged by our public representatives. Shirking your responsibilities by trying to push this decision onto the next council is irresponsible and a complete disservice to your electorate. We've seen this tactic already used with respect to the Green Line, coincidentally or not, by a large number of residents from Ward 11. The Guidebook still allows the building of single detached homes. It is imperative to know that not all families want these housing types and feel forced into them due to a lack of housing choices. For my family, it's much more important for us to be in a community where our child can bike to school safely, we can walk to a nearby grocery store, and all of our needs are met within a short car-free distance of about 15 minutes. We are not alone in this view, as the family demographic isn't getting their needs met in the inner city. The youth of today are our community leaders of tomorrow, and we should be building our city for them. The Guidebook is a long-term goal that should be focusing on the needs of youth in our planning process. This is important as younger generations of people are more likely to opt out of car ownership and crave walkable, complete communities with strong transit connections. If young people are feeling that Calgary doesn't provide them opportunities to start families, businesses, and exchange creative ideas, we are failing as a city. The idea that Calgary can stay a sprawling and car-dependent city is outdated thinking, no longer based in reality. We need to plan for our future residents, not dig in our heels and stay stuck in the past. Not passing the Guidebook and pushing for a delay is pandering to the few residents who are more concerned with keeping the status quo in Calgary. This does not rise up to meet the challenge of a diversifying city that is competing on a global stage to attract youth and business. Calgary will suffer if we do not plan for our younger generation's future. They will leave, they will go to other cities, and they won't look back on a city that's abandoned them. Please approve the Guidebook for great communities. Thank you. And if I have like 5 seconds left, I just want to say Marda Loop is a wonderful, family-oriented, and active community, and it doesn't deserve any of the offhanded bad faith arguments that it's been receiving over the last 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simaluk. That was very feisty for this time of the evening. I feel awake now. Thank you. Let's go to David Barrett now. Mr. Barrett, are you there?
I sure am.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, Your Worship and members of Council. My name is David Barrett, and I'm speaking to you today as a community member living in the neighborhood of Renfrew. I'm incredibly happy and humbled to have heard the last panel, including Mr. Perzan, and DeBreo, identifying the privilege of being able to engage in this drawn-out procedure, and also to you, Your Worship, for identifying the privilege that allows such engagement. I will try to not, go over what they have already very eloquently said in too much detail. They provided an incredibly challenging act to follow. As I've done previously, I would like to ask Council to specifically reflect on who has the capacity to take part in this multi-day public hearing. It is not the majority of Calgarians. There are many voices you are not hearing today. I'm here as a privileged person who has the ability to engage with Council and sit through many hours of a public hearing. Reflect on the demographics from whom you're hearing today and weigh that in your deliberations on the Guidebook when you eventually do vote. I've sat through and listened to the majority of this hearing and can't help but dissect some of the recurring themes and misinformation I've heard. I've heard that the Guidebook is both too vague, but then also that it is too heavy-handed and will forever modify Calgary's communities irreparably. I've heard that it is trying to do all things to all people, but that it is also social engineering. I've heard that folks want stability and predictability, but not in the way that the Guidebook provides. I've heard it's too large and full of planning speak, but also that it is lacking granularity. I'm inexplicably puzzled by the contradictory statements by those vehemently opposing the Guidebook. I also find the contradiction of those that usually champion the free market, now urging government protectionism, puzzling. Calgary is in dire need of a plan moving forward into the future. This is one part of a multi-step plan. We cannot continue to grow consistently outward for both economic, environmental, and inclusionary reasons. My friend and fellow community member, Nathan Harlock, has provided crucial and vital evidence on the economic side of things. Others, such as the Alberta Eco Trust and the Calgary Climate Hub, have spoken to the environmental need for forward-looking planning, and many others, including Leslyn Joseph and many people this evening, have addressed the inclusionary aspects, or in current terms, the exclusionary aspects of current zoning processes. I will avoid repeating those great points of the other speakers in the interest of time. Unfortunately, meaningful questions and feedback on the plan have been drowned out by other less salient points. I would question, honestly, whether Map 1, identifying preferential areas for infill and increased density, is required. If this guidebook is great for some communities, I would suggest that it is good across the city. I would also argue that there should be no exclusionary zoning amendment, as Councillor Gondik is planning to table. I also suggest that items such as urban forest targets and enforcement are crucial to building a resilient Calgary. Also, incorporating a specific time period for review and updating is important. Finally, I want to echo the statements of Jean Kimber, the Highland Park Community Association president, who spoke yesterday. As a community member within a community currently without an LAP or ARP and that is involved in the North Hill Plan, I implore Council to consider all of the work that has gone into the North Hill Plan and execution of the guidebook. Please do not toss out all of the hard work community members have done on the North Hill Plan. We are long overdue for a targeted and planned rejuvenation of our community as opposed to the current ad hoc approach. Thank you for your time, and specifically to the administration, at 9:45 on a Tuesday night, who have worked tirelessly on the guidebook throughout the process and throughout this public hearing. Your efforts, professionalism, and responsiveness do not go unnoticed. That's all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barrett, and thank you for your thank you to the public servants as well. Let's go to Thea Wingert. Are you there? Ms. Wingert, are you there?
Can I go ahead?
Yeah, I can hear you now, and everybody else, please mute. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Your Worship and City Councillors. Thanks for this marathon meeting that you've held today and giving us all the opportunity to speak. I will not repeat a lot of the same things that I wanted to say have already been said in panels 28 and up until now in 29. So I'll just make this brief. I want to say I'm a Mount Pleasant resident and I support the guidebook. I support the diversity in my neighborhood, and my street is already tremendously diverse in terms of both people and houses, and I hope it stays that way. I'm an EA professional. I can't help but think of ecological footprints when considering stuff like this. So that means we can't keep developing sprawl into infinity and beyond. We need to cap our city's geographic footprint and make use of the space that we already have. The city has a role to play in preserving what's left of the ecological integrity of the ecosystems that surround the city, and a means to do so is through climate-friendly, sensible densification of the existing urban footprint, which is exactly what this guidebook aims to do. I urge you to consider, Council, that Elbow Park is just one community, and there's a lot of great initiatives in the guidebook, and sending it back to the drawing board now would be a waste of the city's time and resources, and also do a disservice to all the community associations, city employees, and community members that got it to where it is today. I urge the Council to try to address the concerns raised by Elbow Park residents and other community members, but I don't think the guidebook needs to be scrapped, and that's an unreasonable request. It says a clear path forward for bringing positive changes among communities and small but local minorities should not derail all of the good work that's already been done. Lastly, as a Mount Pleasant resident, I can already see the benefits that this kind of densification brings, as new businesses have moved into the area and have given things for my family to do without even leaving the community. And I'll counter, someone said that there's no such thing as a historical neighborhood with tall trees, and I can confirm we still have all of our beautiful tall trees on our beautiful street. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you very much for being here. Let's go to Mr. Schmidt, please. Are you there, Nathaniel?
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
Good evening, Your Worship and City Council. My name is Nathaniel Schmidt. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on this issue, and thank you for your patience in hearing so many submissions over the last 2 days and extending tonight's submissions so I don't have to try and fall asleep with all this built-up adrenaline. I'm here to add a voice of support for the guidebook and to urge Council to vote for its approval. I live in Marda-Loop and have been renting the same house since 2008. I have lived with a variety of roommates over this time
and now live with my fiance. We live on a street with rental units, expensive new builds, homes from the 80s and 90s, and small apartment buildings. One street over, there are homes from World War I, amongst infills, larger condo buildings, and other single-family homes with renters. There are people of all ages and various backgrounds in this small pocket of diversity. We have walkable access to transit, amenities, and green spaces. It is a privilege to have these things near me while being able to rent a home I can afford. After hearing all the arguments over the last 2 days, I wonder, is this the kind of neighborhood those in opposition to the Guidebook are worried about? I support the Guidebook because I believe all Calgarians deserve the opportunity I've been given, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Density and diversity have been treated like four-letter words, with the implication that renters and higher density housing are somehow liabilities for our community. I don't define myself by how I pay for where I live. I define myself as a member of my community who just happens to rent and who cares deeply about those around him and those who live in the same community. The Guidebook begins to address issues like affordability, social housing, and the environment. And although it does not address everything, rarely does any kind of legislative or policy document achieve everything for everyone. It is certainly not ripe for the abuse that we are being led to believe it will cause to the coveted single-family home. Calgary has the highest percentage of single-family home ownership of any major Canadian city, and the argument that this kind of home ownership is somehow under threat from this Guidebook is a fiction. What the Guidebook does do is create the opportunity for flexibility that gives space to more voices, resulting in a more equitable approach to community planning, corresponding more effectively with the needs of all citizens. This should not be equated with silencing or erasing certain voices. It only requires us to consider a diversity of needs that represents all of those that live in our communities and neighborhoods, or, more importantly, those who could potentially live in our communities and neighborhoods. The arguments in opposition to the Guidebook have often been well-researched and interesting. They take deep dives into complex areas of policy and legislative interpretation that is at times impressive. However, they sing the same refrain. I have what I want, where I want, end of story. This is not how great cities are built. These arguments are asking you, as council, to prioritize the privilege of a select few over the needs of the many. This way of thinking is as outdated as our past planning models and should be done away with. Words like heritage, history, and character are vague and unhelpful. Whose heritage? Whose history? Whose character? These words can be loaded with whatever meaning suits your goals, and their definition is entirely subjective. In their worst form, these are code words for keeping people out and ensuring certain areas of our city are inaccessible to all except for a privileged few. I am aware of no covenants that restrict certain communities to people above a certain income threshold that own a vehicle, but arguably this has been the effect of traditional city planning. The single-family detached home is not everyone's dream. A 3-story single-family home is not superior to a 3-story apartment. These are tired narratives that do not reflect the deficit in affordable housing, population fluctuations, and the necessity of adapting our cities to climate change. The Guidebook begins to address issues of walkability, transit access, access to amenities, diversifying tax bases, climate resiliency, and equitable communities in a healthy, thriving city. Council has a responsibility to consider all Calgarians when making their decision to vote to approve the Guidebook, not just those that have the means and time to organize. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today and all your hard work on this issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt. That brings us to the end of this panel, and I don't see any questions, so I thank all of you. I thought I'd be dozing off, but I'm energized by the energy of all 5 members of this panel. Thank you very much for that. I understand we've got a couple of folks who either cannot be here today or who we missed earlier. So Matthew McArthur, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you're going to be the first one on this next panel, okay? And
Perfect.
Bethel Afework, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, Your Worship.
Tell me the correct pronunciation of your name. I know I've asked you that before.
You said it perfectly.
Okay, great. Thank you. You're going to be second on this panel. Dave Robertson, are you here?
Yes, I am, Your Worship.
You're going to be third on the panel, okay?
Thanks.
Greg Hart, are you with us? Greg Hart? Okay. How about Sam Edney? Sam, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, Your Worship.
Great. You're going to be fourth on the panel. And I'll do another call out for Judy Look. Are you here, Judy? Okay. How about Chris Stanley?
Your Worship, it's Greg. I am here.
Oh, you are here. Greg Hart.
Yeah.
Okay, Greg. My next one was also Greg. I was just checking. So you're going to be number 5 on this panel. Okay, Greg?
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we'll close that panel off here. And I will go to Mr. McArthur. The floor is yours, sir.
Cool. Okay, good evening, Your Worship and councillors. My name is Matthew McArthur, and I live in Ramsey, which is one of Calgary's oldest neighborhoods. I'm a student, and I rent, and I've lived in Calgary most of my life. But as it's been said many times, those really shouldn't matter, because the voices of Calgarians matter, whether they moved in yesterday or lived here for over 100 years. It doesn't matter if you rent or own. Your voice should matter to all councillors, no more or less than any other Calgarian. I'd really like to point out that almost half of Calgary's housing stock is not single detached dwellings, and we have not heard from a lot of people living in those other housing types or from a diverse set of demographic backgrounds. I really hope that that indicates to Council the real importance of engagement that occurs long before this public hearing. This hearing is not accessible to so many Calgarians, and many of you know that, and finally, people in this hearing are starting to speak out against it. I fully support the guidebook. I also support the fact that this is a living document and should be adequately amended to make it even better year after year, LAP after LAP, and as more information is brought forward by all stakeholders, including citizens. I listen to council meetings and committee meetings, and they're often quite dry. But honestly, as a citizen, I'm quite annoyed at the people who fail to adequately engage with the city until it hits the media, which is often after it's been through meaningful engagement and a committee process. This happens all the time, and it's actually really upsetting. I'd also really like to point out to Council that a plebiscite does not reach Calgary's youth, permanent residents, or immigrants who all call Calgary their home. That's hundreds of thousands of Calgarians whose voices would not be heard. The engagement that happened prior to today's meeting captures these demographics, the diversity that is the city of Calgary. I followed the planning process for years, reading ARPs all over the city and putting in my 2 cents on the city's engage.calgary.ca website. I hope that all of you are paying attention to the thoughtful amendments provided by groups like Sustainable Calgary and many citizens across the city. They touch on the important elements of city building. And this is exactly why this is a living document, and it should have a refresh cycle and be willing to evolve with the situation and the city. I have a few recommendations that I believe administration should seek to add to this guidebook after it's approved today. This is a menu of development options, and I think it should also include a menu of engagement options. This city should also always push for new engagement that reaches Calgarians that have been mostly left out. Furthermore, I believe the land use bylaw reform needs to happen now. Many citizens speaking out today have actually indirectly mentioned the need for this change. Calgary's zoning is frankly inadequate to meet both the wants and needs of Calgarians across all communities and demographics. Lastly, I think that once this document is approved, the city can begin to add additional policy on things like street design that consult with disability consultants, seniors, and youth, and everyone in between to build a city that is inclusive of everyone, including those experiencing temporary and permanent disabilities and our youth who play games in the streets. I say this all the time to everyone around me. A city that is designed for our most vulnerable and marginalized citizens is a city that is livable for absolutely everyone. The guidebook is a step in this direction. I hope that you guys can approve the guidebook today and work together to build upon this, moving forward with thoughtful and engaging amendments. Thank you all for listening to everyone who has spoken out. with this guidebook. And thank you for clerks for making this process so easy. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for those words and that passion as well. Bethel, are you with us? Bethel?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. Hello, everyone. My name is Bethel, and I'm here speaking in support of the guidebook. I've also spoke at PUD, so many of the things that I'm going to be talking about are similar to then. It's been interesting to hear all the discussions all day today. You know, you got to ask, what's the difference with a mansion and a fourplex, really? And, at the end of the day, the guidebook, it's a guide. And just like any other law, it's going to be changing. It's a changing policy. If laws never change, the policies never change, we'd still be living in segregated neighborhoods. I'm not saying that the guidebook is a perfect document. And I think that there's a lot of things that could be added and changed. But that doesn't mean that we need to erase all the time that we've done and all the work that's been put in by everyone at the city and the stakeholders and the citizens and the community members to make this happen. I think it's just a start, the guidebook, and I think it provides an avenue to introduce neat designs. I think that the zoning is a problem, and single detached houses could actually be so much more than they are now. It's not like the guidebook mentions anything like circular homes or designing things to make intergenerational living possible, but these are all very simple ways to add density in our communities as well. I think that it's unfortunate that people think that mature trees and, nature and the parks and green areas are all going to be demolished and it's all going to just look like 50 feet skyscrapers across their communities, because that's really not what I see. And I think that it provides opportunities to have more green spaces. I think that green spaces should be better integrated, honestly, in the guidebook than what's mentioned now. But like I said, I believe that all these changes can be discussed over time. Local area plans have to be made in all these communities before anything happens. So I would encourage every person to be very extensive in looking at the local area plans when they're out. But I don't believe that should stop council from voting in this guidebook at the present moment. I think that, there is no mention of things like even co-housing communities. And there's already 2 co-housing communities in Calgary and another one coming in the inner city area, potentially in Bridgeland. And these community structures, they add density. They provide community space, and I think they should be looked into. It's nothing new. We've been living in co-housing structures, sharing amenities and resources with our neighbors since the beginning of time in human existence, while always having our own private spaces. It's heritage buildings and landscapes are mentioned so many times in this document, but I feel sometimes it fails to really show the heritage and the landscapes that came before colonial settlements. And I think that when you hear these sentiments of protecting heritage or and all these landscapes, sometimes it's really good to ask yourself, what is that definition of a heritage building? When was that heritage building made? I think that there's lots of things that could be added to this guidebook, but that does not diminish my support for it. I don't think that neighborhoods need to have such distinct separation between parks and recreation and neighborhood spaces. And I think that artisan culture can be integrated within all centers of the neighborhood, like commercial and residential, not just parks. And I think that buildings and higher density buildings could be very appealing. We could make green terraces and walls in places like Japan and things like that. So there's a lot of potential for this guidebook to do great things, and that's why I think that council should vote for it. I know it's been a long day, and I've heard lots of great sentiments throughout the day. So I'm just going to keep it short and end it here. So thank you so much for giving me the time to speak, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Let's go to Dave Robertson. Are you there, Dave?
Yes, I am. Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Your Worship, Council. My name is Dave Robertson. I want to start by stating that I am a volunteer for my Community Association's Planning Committee. However, the opinions I'm offering today are my own. They don't reflect those of my community association or of its planning committee. I also need to tell you that I work as a meeting facilitator and a conflict resolution professional here in Calgary, and I have some experience with public engagement. I've worked on projects in Calgary, Edmonton, and Lethbridge, serving on the Bow to Bluff initiative, helped to design and facilitate consultations around city charters, was invited to facilitate a number of the Main Streets workshops, and worked on consultations for Thompson Family Park. I tell you this tonight because I want you to understand that I may show some professional biases in my opinions. I want to say that I support the guidebook in principle. I've had many debates and discussions at the pub with my friends and colleagues about the way we need to start conversations about the futures of our communities. While it's not perfect, at least the guidebook shares some concrete options for Calgarians to consider. And while it's lengthy and it might be intimidating to some, I do want to thank the team who created it for their use of plain language and for the use of visual explanations. I wanted to offer my opinion after hearing Mayor Nenshie's observations of citizen feedback regarding implementation. And while I didn't participate in the consultation process for the guide or for the North ARP, I'm not really in a position to judge those. So I will ask those that are listening tonight to participate in a bit of a thought experiment. I'm going to ask you to take a scrap of paper and draw an image of a triangle. At the top corner, I'd like you to write the words of the city. On the lower left, the word developers, and then in the lower right corner, citizens. Based on what you've heard at this hearing tonight, I'd like you to reflect for a moment. Maybe consider the levels of trust amongst these groups and ask yourself, is it sufficient to support the development of the LAPs that are to follow the guide? I'm concerned that the guidebook may not be successful unless we address some of the ongoing challenges we've heard with public engagement. Some have complimented the process surrounding the guide. Others have had complaints or concerns about it. I think it's important to recognize good work. Certainly page 14 does a good job of explaining how the guidebook contributes to the development of the LAPs. But I think it hasn't really received sufficient exposure for consideration by Calgarians. Pages 24 and 25 detail what should be in the plan. It's a lengthy description, but it's good. There are a lot of aspects of the process, though, the public participation process, that are unclear, and that may be what's creating discomfort tonight. So using the mayor's analogy about a recipe book, I think it remains unclear as to who's allowed in the kitchen, who gets to decide or how it gets decided what goes on the dinner table, what the safety and hygiene rules are in the kitchen, and if I can stretch this analogy razor thin, how do we make sure the chefs collaborate as productively as possible? The challenges that for the city that stand out to me are inclusion. How do we get even more Calgarians involved in the discussion of the LAPs? Education, how do we equip these Calgarians so they can participate as fully and thoughtfully as possible? Resources, does the city have the engagement personnel, the resources, and the tools for the sustained effort that the LAPs are going to take? And conflicts, do we have a strategy or an approach for addressing the conflict that we've seen that makes this type of public engagement, past public engagement, toxic? I think there's some challenges for Calgarians that I think we need to address as well. We seem to have endless energy for telling each other what we don't want, but we have to acknowledge that change is inevitable. We can't stop it. We need to start talking about what we're willing to do in the face of change. So how do we help each other look beyond the confines of our own yards and neighborhoods so that we can create great communities in a great city? Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mr. Robertson. It's nice to hear your voice. I haven't heard you in a long time. Nice to have you back. So we're going to go to Sam Edney, please. Sam, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
And before you start, really a natural track down the COP Hill? One of these days we got to talk about that. Go ahead, Mr. Edney.
Hey, we got to do what we got to do, you know. No, thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and council members. Just a quick high five, or I guess an elbow bump during this time, to you all and to City Admin and to the entire Guidebook team. Thank you all for your time on this. It's really, truly greatly appreciated. Also, thank you for providing this public engagement space. The citywide dialogue truly shows how much we all care about our city. So it's been a long days, I guess. I'll keep this brief. I'm calling in to offer my support of the Guidebook. Briefly, my family and I live in Montgomery, a community which by 2010 had seen a population decline of a third of its 1960 residents. I welcome the Guidebook's approach to enhance Calgary's communities and the suggestions to guide community associations toward appropriate density and transit-oriented development when creating their LAPs. The proposed Guidebook would support and allow our community to thrive and attract new residents from more walks of life by meeting a variety of housing and service needs. I, like many Calgarians, truly appreciate that neighborhood character is not dictated by housing type or appearance, but that it's created by the diversity of residents and the engagement and interaction at the street level, in the green spaces, and through use of amenities. I have a young family, and we benefit from the proximity to the beautiful parks, multiple schools, and grocery stores all within walking distance. However, as a one-car household, we would love to see more independent restaurants, coffee shops, bakeries, etc., that we can walk or bike to. But I understand that for businesses to invest in communities, they need residents to support them. The Guidebook provides a framework to promote and plan for appropriate growth that meets the current and future needs of communities and to encourage ongoing public and private investment into our established neighborhoods. Just for quick neighborhood context, we live a block away from affordable housing, which is full of young families playing in their front yards. We live down the hill from large $1 million plus single family and single semi-detached houses. With the recent zoning changes set forth with the Main Streets plan, we've seen empty bungalows along main corridors become new homes and fourplexes to welcome 4 new houses of residents to the neighborhood. With addition of mixed-use 6-story condo buildings, we've seen services and restaurants added to the neighborhood that have helped keep us in the community. This diversity in housing options allows Montgomery to be a more accessible neighborhood, including those prospective homeowners who don't have the desire or financial means or physical ability to live in and maintain a single-family home. And so just to wrap up, sustainable development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. My family and I look forward to being a part of a city that promotes sustainability, diversity, inclusivity, instead of enforcing barriers. The Guidebook doesn't just guide how our communities will be today, but how they can meet the needs for the future, for our children, and for this reason, I support the Guidebook for great communities. Thank you. Stay well, everyone. And I really appreciated these past couple panels, the energy. It's been really great. So thank you very much, and take care, everyone.
Thanks so much, Mr. Edney. You know what? Me too. And it's not because people are speaking on one side or the other, but I just feel like I'm hearing from a lot of people who love this city and really care about the future. It's very energizing for me. So keep being energizing, Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll do my best, and it's a tough act to follow. And so thanks to you and to councillors for doing these marathon sessions, and thanks to the team that worked on the Guidebook. I don't think people fully understand the great amount of work that goes into putting these things together. And, my partners and I are building a company that helps build entire ecosystems of innovation-based ventures. And these are the ventures that are the future of our city. And I co-founded a sort of unschool to help people build design-based competencies to transition from past employment into the future-focused employment opportunities that support those very same innovation ventures. We've literally bet our future on helping to usher in this city's future because we believe it is becoming something different than what it's been. And one of the things that makes our approach unusual is the way in which we see the built environment of a place as being fully integrated with its economic potential. Place is completely tied up with economic success. It will get harder and harder to produce viable economic outcomes without paying attention to the quality of place. And the guidebook speaks very directly to the quality of place. And so I'm speaking to support it. We talk to people every day that we are trying to attract to our city. There isn't enough room for all of them in Inglewood, but that's where they all want to go. Why is that? My most important message today is that we need to go faster, much faster. To successfully live in the future as an important and relative community in the globe, attracting and keeping the people who live in Calgary that is becoming something different, we need to look to those who know how it's done. There are examples and experiments from all over the world, and the guidebook incorporates a lot of this great knowledge. Does the guidebook suggest a future that looks that looks different than the way things generally are now? Absolutely, and for good reason, because doing things the way we've always done them ends in collapse. The word density is getting used a lot, and I would suggest that while it is a necessary condition for success, I'm not sure it's really the goal of the guidebook. The goal is vibrancy. In the light of a year where we've suffered through a global pandemic and people have become accustomed to staying at home, place becomes even more important. We look for more complete experiences that we were used to getting by moving around more. Many communities in Calgary are vibrancy deserts. Sure, some have mature trees and grassy lawns, but there is no interactivity in the populations that have fallen. If you go for a walk, you're going for a walk because there are few destinations to reach without your car. You're just going for a walk. So this vicious cycle that leads to less economic activity, fewer schools, more driving, less people, and less diversity of people in the way that they look, the way they think, and the things that they do. Vibrancy needs people. Businesses need people. When these things are in proximity to each other, the communities thrive. The restaurants and other businesses that many people from affluent inner-city single-family neighborhoods love to frequent would simply not exist if there weren't higher vibrancy adjacent neighborhoods. Most of the city doesn't even have that opportunity because adjacent communities are also low vibrancy. So complaints about the guidebook that it leads to too many cars, not enough parking, too much noise, is really people talking about the things that they don't want to have in their city, which are things like too many cars in the neighborhood competing with the people for the vibrancy that we're looking for. The guidebook makes this possible. And I think if we listen carefully to a lot of the things that people are saying, they're uncovering some of the core elements of the struggles that we face both fiscally and from a quality of life perspective in this city. So the guidebook is not perfect, but it is good. And as an example of how it's not perfect, it doesn't ban leaf blowers, which would sure be great if it did. It does lay out principles to follow and moves away from time-consuming and immediately out-of-date planning. It recognizes the connectivity between communities and creates the opportunity for building vibrancy that leads to an increased density of economic success, local services, and opportunities. That is the density we should all be working to bring to life, and we're not going fast enough, not even close. Things are changing everywhere. We are in a global race for talent and opportunity and battling to avoid a precarious climate future. Expecting change leads to less disappointment. Leading and embracing change is powerful and exciting. Let's not waste days and days on trying to avoid the changes that have been thoughtfully considered to meet our challenges while telegraphing to the world that we just don't get it. We can't do that. Let's spend these precious days leading and inventing a vibrant place where everyone wants to be and are able to be. We're running out of time. Let's adopt the guidebook, stop building the past, and start building what's next. We can improve the documents as we go. Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Hart. That takes us to the end of this panel. We are 10:20. Why don't we see if we can get one or two more speakers in? I'll see who's here. Chris Stanley, are you here? How about Greg Culver? Are you here? How about Judy Look? Tara Weiss?
Yes, I'm here, Your Worship.
Okay, you may be our last speaker this evening, but let me see if I've got one more. Do we have Shevaughn Smith?
I'm here.
Okay, Tara and Shevaughn, you are going to bat cleanup today in our final panel. So Tara, please, after you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Your Worship and City Councillors. My name is Tara Weiss, and I'm a resident of Park Hill. I'm an active community volunteer, but I'm speaking my own views. Our neighborhood is already living the Guidebook vision, with an average annual household income of $60,000, a population of 1,921 people, living in 0.2 square miles or 0.6 kilometers squared. Our density today is 70% higher than the average Calgary community. Within our narrow boundaries of a few blocks, there are single-family dwellings on 25 and 50-foot lots, a variety of infill housing, duplexes, secondary suites, townhouses, low-rise apartment blocks, and some of those are quite large. And below our hill is Stanley Park, providing ready access to Calgary's considerable trail system. And across McLeod Trail is a 39th Avenue C train station, along with local business service. We also have access to a variety of businesses within walking distance: grocery stores, restaurants, cafes, all the shops along 4th Street and Mission. And while on the McLeod Trail side, within a scant 2 blocks, there are 2 car dealerships, 2 gas stations, a Jiffy Lube, Midas Muffler, and car rental business. Park Hill is not homogeneous, and residents span a broad economic spectrum, from those exiting homelessness to the very affluent, and will have a diverse set of cultural backgrounds. In addition, Park Hill coexists with our neighbors, the residents of the Dream Center, a drug addiction recovery facility, and the John Howard Society located on the other side of McLeod Trail. All our neighborhood development has successfully occurred under current rules. Where is our story ending? In the middle of our wonderful community, what the guide would term neighborhood local, we have a developer wishing to redevelop a highly desirable 50-foot lot and jam a 5-unit complex into the same space. The community has rallied against this, and the developer has cited the advent of this guidebook as the pathway, and this is our future in Park Hill. I've listened to arguments over the last 2 days, passionately presented, suggested improvements and questions, and it really leaves me to wonder why all the pressure is put on inner city communities alone to shoulder the burden of this debate. I do not understand why the guidebook does not apply this philosophy to the entire city. This should be a city solution, not an inner city solution. And I do not believe the guidebook is being strategic in approach. Successful strategic development pinpoints its efforts, as CMLC did in developing the East Village and the plans for the Curry Barracks. The objective of great communities in this guide is for the purposes of general densification for the inner city only. I don't live in a heritage house. I live in a densified community, and it's wonderful, and I'm happy here. And I do have access to where some of the strongest opposition has been voiced over the last couple of days. I will say I find it tragic that the guidebook only contemplates structures and not neighborhood context. I don't want my only Calgary heritage experience or architectural enjoyment to be accessible through paying an entrance fee to Heritage Park. So as I sit here in my 18-foot wide home and I think about the simplified classifications applied only to the inner city, it really makes me fume. This document should address the city as a whole for opportunity, urban and suburban. It should have community classifications that recognize what we're calling traditional heritage value or architectural interest and give residents confidence in their future. Please return this guidebook back to the planning community, back to the planning department, and rethink it for the big picture. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for being here, Tara, and let's go to Shevaughn Smith.
Hello. Sorry, just 1 second. Good evening, everyone, and congratulations on making it to the end of the night. I don't feel worthy to end such a group of speakers. I have been listening over the past day and have heard a lot of opinions from some very specific neighborhoods, so wanted to add to those from other areas of the city. I'm very privileged to be able to have followed this conversation and call in and express my own opinion. In the past, I have rented secondary suites in Riverbend, Kingsland, Braeside, Killarney, and now my husband and I love to be able to say that we live in Sonalta in a condo and are raising our 2 children here. But as others have noted, that shouldn't matter. We love living in this neighborhood and having access to transit, bike lanes, the river, and lots of other fantastic neighborhoods. We love the diversity, the sense of community, and amenities that this neighborhood provides. Others who want to live in this kind of neighborhood should be able to, regardless of income bracket, and this should not mean being relegated to the suburbs. Back in 2013, when the floods took place, I went house to house in Elbow Park asking how I could help. I got into the mud and muck and for days on end with people whom I didn't even know their name. I wish some of the residents from that neighborhood and others could consider how their community was there for them then and think of returning the favor. We need to be willing to change and let go of the past and focus on the future for those that we want to welcome to Calgary and grow up in Calgary. This guidebook has many ideas and is a very long, detailed read. To turn it back to administration to revise it would be, in my opinion, a waste of time and most importantly, money. If you are truly a fiscal conservative who is concerned with taxpayer dollars, you would approve this guidebook and then edit it later. I get tired of elected officials and their inability to make decisions. This is what you were voted to do. Please make a decision and do not put this off any longer. Please support the guidebook. Good night.
Thanks very much, Ms. Smith. Mr. Hart, are you still on the line by any chance? I had to ask you a question and I missed it.
Yeah, I'm on the line.
Oh, great. You know, Mr. Hart, you gave us a very different perspective than we've heard from a lot of folks today, and that is the perspective of someone who is actively building business and the economy in Calgary. And frankly, it was a bit surprising for me to hear you talk about how I totally get move fast. You've told me that before on other things, but about really the piece around getting the city right in terms of building businesses like your own and businesses in general. And I just thought I would highlight that and ask you to say just a bit more about why you think getting this piece right is essential to economic development.
Sure. I think that the really important part of it is that it used to be that, a company could set up anywhere and then the people would go to wherever the company was and they would live wherever the company was. But it's flipped. We're now in a situation where the place is becoming the most important thing. It's becoming key to attracting people. And I think even post-COVID, that's going to continue to be an issue. And, so if you're wanting to build a team of really great people, like globally significant people, and then use that to grow a local team of people who can take on any challenge on the planet, then we need to have a place that fulfills all the desires that they have about what a complete life is like. And so, we have to be able to have a city that produces those opportunities and experiences so that we can compete with other places. It's really vital, and it's kind of quiet. Like, people don't always run around talking about it, but it's absolutely clear that it's happening.
And how would passing this guidebook, in your opinion, help us with that challenge?
Well, I think that the guidebook has, going to the point of moving more quickly as well, the guidebook has principles in it that are driving towards the things that people are telling us that they want to see in the city that they live in. I mean, it's fantastic to be able to live close to the mountains, for instance, and have a beautiful river valley, but there are a bunch of other components that need to go into that. And when we talk to people, they're telling us these things. And in fact, there are some people you talk to, I know it's going to shock a lot of people, but the mountains is like sort of, okay, yeah, that's nice, but the urban experience is something that they're really focused on. So this idea of connectivity between communities, for instance, it's in the guidebook, is as an example, is something that I think will lead us in the direction where we can move quickly to think about how we can create these complete experiences for people in more complete neighborhoods and communities. And that's, and as I said, I mean, it's not perfect. There's things in it that I would love to see that aren't there, not just the leaf blower thing, and, whatever, but it's a living document. So it gets us going in the right direction, moves us off of, trying to do just such exquisite planning. It's just about creating the right mix of things to create complete experiences for people. So that's how I see the guidebook gets us moving in the direction we need to go.
Super. Thank you very much. And folks, it is 10:30 on the dot. So thank you for a great day of conversations. We'll be back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. We have a few more people to finish off on the panel, and then we'll see where we go from there. See you tomorrow at 1.